everyone. Welcome. We'd like to ask you to move a little bit more to the front, if that would be possible. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us in the session, Putting Your Life on the Line on the Front Lines of Exposing Corruption. My name is Andrea Arzaba, and I work for the Global Investigative Journalism Network. It is a pleasure for me to be here today with three amazing journalists that have covered corruption for years and that will share their experiences with us. These reporters are from Ghana, from Nepal, and from the Netherlands. And the dynamic will be the following. I'm going to read the biography of each of the journalists, and then each will have a couple of minutes to talk more about the situation in the countries where they are doing their coverage. They're also going to talk about tips and tools of how to better cover corruption in their own contexts. And then I would like to ask the audience to please save the questions you have and ask them at the end. So I'm going to start with Enrique Wieser. Enrique Wieser has investigated financial crime and corruption for the past 10 years. She started her career at the Netherlands Authority for the Financial Markets, covering misconduct at financial institutions. Then she became an investigative journalist, covering Southeast Asia. In 2018, she founded Global Ground Media, an online publication and training institute for investigative journalists focused on corruption. And now she also works as an illicit finance policy advisor to European governments, EU institutions, and international financial institutions. So welcome, Enrique. Then we have Selassie Kov-Seiram. Selassie is a Ghanaian journalist and digital media producer with over 12 years of experience in news reporting and multimedia storytelling. He specializes in the production of investigative documentaries, and he has also worked with a network of young investigative journalists and media organizations in Nigeria that produce stories about corruption for a project funded by the MacArthur Foundation. And he's also a 2022 Nieman Fellow of the Nieman Foundation for Journalism at Harvard University. Welcome, Selassie. And finally, we have Rajneesh. Rajneesh is a South Asian investigative reporter, editor, and filmmaker. He founded the Nepal Investigative Multimedia Journalism Network in April of 2020 amidst the COVID-19 pandemic to support the Nepali journalists doing investigations. He led the organization to support more than 400 journalists and frontline workers with safety gear because journalists lacked PPE. His investigation produces investigative stories on social justice issues and trains journalists on investigative reporting. It's a member of GIGN and a partner of OCCRP. He's also a Fulbright Humphrey alumnus. So welcome, everyone. And please, Enrique, we're going to start with you.
Can I use this mic? Yeah, cool. Hi, everyone. Nice to see so many familiar faces after 3 days of the conference. Most of you might know me as an illicit finance policy advisor, but today I'm putting on my journalism hat. I hope you will enjoy that as much as I do. I just wanted to get a tally of the people in the room. Who of you would consider themselves to be an investigator? It doesn't have to be media, it can be civil society, or at the government, but who says we are investigators? Okay, not that many. Some not sure, maybe want to be investigators, maybe get tips here. I wanted to start this presentation and really invite you also to feel free, feel welcome to bring in your own cases at the end. If there is something you want to discuss, something you're struggling with, a challenge you want to get feedback on, feel free to use the panel now, but also so afterwards. I am indeed from the Netherlands, but I covered Myanmar for the last 4 years. So I'll be talking mainly about that today. Next slide, please. This is Myanmar. For those of you who don't know, there was an unfortunate coup d'etat last year in February. It's not the first time that the country has experience with military dictatorships, unfortunately. There have been several ones since 1962, and only a very brief period of semi-civilian, I wouldn't say civilian, but semi-civilian government from 2016 until last year, though. As opposed to previous dictatorships, though, this time the people really came together in a massive popular revolution. They do not want to live under a military dictatorship, and there were protests all over the country. Like previous dictatorships, though, these were compressed, they were repressed, there was a violent crackdown on the civilians, and since then 16,000 people have been arrested, around 2,500 killed, and some of them died in prison as well, where there's regular rape and torture of both men and women. Over the last 18 months, I have witnessed the violence slowly increasing as the frustration of the military grew and the resolve of the people continued. As I said in previous periods, maybe they would manage to crack down on people in a few weeks or months. Now it's already 18 months, and they are getting more horrific by the day. It started after a few weeks with snipers targeting journalists and civil societies and leaders of the people at the protest. Then at night, they released prisoners and told them to target resistance communities at night, burning houses and breaking in and these kind of things. Then it moved to burning entire villages in the mountains in the north when people continued to protest there. And even a few weeks ago, they targeted a school with air missile strike and even decapitated a teacher. So you can really see that the violence is just getting more and more horrific in an attempt to bring fear to the people. A little bit of history. By now, Myanmar is the site of the longest ongoing civil war in the world, with regular occurrences of genocidal violence. I'm sure all of you remember the Rohingya genocide and the exodus in 2017, but this is not a new instance. It has happened for decades, unfortunately. And coming back to the topic, of course, that we are talking about for this week is corruption. They really used the military to set up military crony or businessman networks to have access to the economic benefits and the natural resources of the country, both the legal economies like construction and telecommunication, but also the illicit economies. Myanmar is the second largest producer of heroin. There's human trafficking going on, any topic you can think of. Next slide. So I moved to Myanmar in 2017, before the recent genocide instance and before the pandemic. And I got a grant from Transparency International to investigate some corruption instances or possible corruption related to the COVID-19 relief funds. I figured lots of money coming in. I'm sure it's only a matter of time before I can find some irregularities or nepotism or misuse of funds. And unfortunately, I was not wrong. Of course, I would have preferred not to find anything and to move on to another topic, especially as horrific as misusing pandemic funds, right? While they were really, really needed. The first two stories I produced before the coup happened and the last one after the coup. I started with finding links between military companies who were receiving some of the government contracts to move PPE into the country. There was an instance of a company that the UN already found out was giving donations to the border security and to military outposts in Rakhine State in relationship to the genocide as a possible quid pro quo, possibly. And then we also saw that less than optimal quality of PPE was produced, was delivered, risking the health of doctors and nurses who already had a massive lack of masks, for example. And finally, the price of the products delivered was far above market value, also indicating some irregularities there. And then a few months later, moving on to the occurrences in the Yangon General Hospital, we were hearing and seeing horrific things happening there, videos appearing of people passing away in hallways, never having access to oxygen, let alone ventilators. And we unfortunately found a link to corruption. We found that people needed to pay to get oxygen. And if you could not pay, you would simply not get it and be left to die, let alone the lack of ventilators in the country. There were only 247 for 53 million people available. So you can imagine the consequences of that. Then the third story, a few days before the coup happened, an international financial institute transferred another entrenchment of COVID-19 relief funds. In this instance, 372 million. Before the coup, the semi-civilian government produced reports telling the world what they were doing with these funds. Of course, there were issues with that and they were not perfect, but at least there was some attempt at transparency. This completely stopped after the coup, and the Multilateral Development Bank acknowledged that they do not know what happened to the funds and have no ideas. And these are loans, so the Myanmar people do have to repay the money in 10 to 15 years, even though we don't know what happened with the funds. Next slide. So then, especially the last story, which I decided to publish when I was outside of the country. I thought it was too risky to publish that when I was still inside. And I actually left 3 weeks before a US reporter was picked up at the Yangon airport. He was a lot more well-known, so I don't think it would have happened to me. But still, it's really important to think about your own safety in these situations. And the situation is a lot worse for local Myanmar journalists than it will ever be for an international person, of course. You get a lot more attention, you can call your embassy and try to get out, and the Myanmar people have it a lot worse under these circumstances. Talking about local media, right after the coup, they started to ban media organizations in the country. You actually cannot access the website of critical independent media within Myanmar. You need to use a VPN to access websites. And many were forced to return their media license, or they were sued and completely shut down. 150 journalists have been arrested for a few months, for a few weeks, then some released again. Unfortunately, 2 have died in custody. And 1 journalist was killed in a missile airstrike in the north of the country. We don't know the current tally. Also for the safety, often the identity of journalists is not made public if they are arrested, but we know last year there were still 26 in prison. Resulting basically that the media landscape in Myanmar has been decimated. The journalists who are still in the country are in hiding, are doing their work under cover of darkness, I wanted to say, but they definitely do it during the day. And the others, some of the well-known ones, have left the country. They are now based in Thailand or in Australia or in India. Most of them are in Thailand at the moment. So this is a situation that they've dealt with before during the previous dictatorships, so they are not strangers to this. But it is a very difficult situation to gain access to sources and also protect their safety. So there's many challenges, and I don't think we've seen the end of that. Next slide. Digging a little bit deeper into the safety and about these challenges of communicating, Myanmar now has been called also a digital dictatorship. All 4 telecommunication and phone providers were told to redirect their traffic to the military servers, and all phone and online traffic of 53 million people inside the country is being intercepted, monitored, and stored without any court order access. We know they are targeting for keywords, for names of familiar people, or just any reference to the former leaders. You will be picked up the same night. Also in terms of physical safety, already mentioned the bombings and the airstrikes, but there are also checkpoints scattered through the country, and you will be asked to open your device and they will search it for the photos. They will check if you have a VPN, which is illegal because that's the only way you can access media websites and social media. Facebook is also banned, for example. And we also see a lot of, so what they do at night, they will come and you need to register your presence as a foreigner. You can only stay the night at the place where you are living, and they will do random searches at night, and if they find people who are not allowed to be there, they will be arrested without ascertaining why you are staying there. So the impact is massive, and also on the daily life. At some point I didn't have Wi-Fi at home. My mobile internet was cut every night, initially also during the day, but they stopped doing that. There were regular electricity cuts. My ATM, my credit card was not working at ATMs anymore. Medicine was difficult to get. Food access was difficult. So it really became difficult just to have a normal daily life, basically. So these are some of the challenges. Happy to discuss more in detail later on. But I want to invite Raj to the podium to talk about Nepal.
Thank you. Good afternoon, you all. Like my first IACC was in Bangkok. That was in 2010. And ever since that, I've been attending the IACCs, and it has been really a wonderful experience. So after the IACC in 2010, I was so inspired about reporting corruption that, can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so it's really inspiring that I went back home. I was working as a local journalist, working with the television, and really wanted to investigate. So one of the stories I did was about how lawmakers in Nepal were misusing their diplomatic passport. The story was about 2 lawmakers who sold their diplomatic passport to businessmen so that businessmen could go and forge the passport and go outside and do the business and come back. So I investigated on a story, and then that story was published. And I went to the lawmakers and actually asked them, what is this? Because I was doing a story for television. I really needed their version on camera. After I published the story, other outlets also took the story, and because others were publishing, the risks on me was minimized, but at the same time I was getting calls and threats as well. So yeah, this is the scenario of doing journalism in a developing country like Nepal. So when we talk about Nepal, the friends in the US, they mostly think it's a country of Mount Everest. And when I talk to friends in UK, they say well, it's a country of Gorkhas, right? But being in a country especially in between India and China, the press freedom, if we talk about press freedom, it's comparatively better. It's not that we are doing well. It's because our neighbors are not doing great. The situation of press freedom in South Asia, especially what's happening in India and China. And the World Press Freedom Index puts Nepal at the 2nd place in South Asia after Bhutan. And, the press freedom is really worse in Afghanistan, in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, and in Sri Lanka. So, but especially when we talk about Nepal, it's not really great, but other countries, our neighbors, are doing even worse. So there are incidents of especially like, violations on press, like in 2021, like there were 62 incidents reported on press freedom violations. So in this context, during COVID-19, I started this organization called NIMSIN, Nepal Investigative Journalism Network. It's a network of like 100 journalists in all 7 provinces in Nepal. Like these journalists work as freelancers, they apply for grants, they work on investigative stories. And we do run collaborative stories on like different issues. One of the recent one we did was about COVID-19 pandemic, where we investigated like the funds, how the vaccines were brought, what are the like, different equipments, like especially the equipments that were given to Nepal when are checked as well. So all sort of issues. Yeah, and we also do investigation, like for example, like this one on trafficking in impunity. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is about one investigation where, I investigate about, specific politician involved in human trafficking in Nepal. These politicians are in such a kleptocratic network that they could get away easily with charges. Like especially this guy, like he has been involved in like the politician involved in like human trafficking for a long time. But even the Supreme Court like released him on mistaken identity, and he just got released. So this is a scenario where the kleptocratic networks are such such strong that they buy the judiciary, which has to be independent, they also like get away with that. And in a situation in Nepal, like even the judiciary, like especially the politicians, like they select the judges, like, and the judges select based on the kind of like recommendation of political leaders or political parties. So when we talk about like independent judiciary, it's really in question in Nepal. And one of the recent like chief judges, like he was investigated, and a lot of things going on in Nepal. And this story, like was published by 100 reporters, journalists for transparency, and also like media outlets in Nepal. And while doing this story, like I went to the village where the victims were, and in past, especially activists and even police officials, like we were there to investigate. They were threatened, sometimes attacked as well. So to do investigative stories is really challenging in these scenarios. But we continue to do that. Next slide, please. So to minimize the harm of just doing like one person doing investigative reporting, like we thought like maybe it's time to collaborate with journalists and like many journalists coming together and doing investigative stories and then publishing in different outlets. So during COVID-19, we teamed up with like 23 journalists in Nepal and investigated COVID-19 fundings. We use a Right to Information Act. We filed RTI applications in many provinces and tried to get the information, but the information that we got was not, in a systematic order. Many did not respond to our request. We also filed at the, National Information Commission as well, and the response was not good. So accountability and like the transparency is really a big question mark, especially during like huge fundings and huge, massive, operations that goes in Nepal. Can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah. Another thing what we're talking about in Nepal is like definitely like NIMSIN is somebody like some organization that prioritize investigative reporting, but during COVID-19, this was not the case. Many journalists were, that they got COVID-19, many were laid off, and there are not media outlets who were actually supporting journalists on field with safety gears and other equipment. So we felt like we need to support journalists, so we prioritized that, supported journalists with PPE, supports, psychological counseling and other, support they required during COVID-19, and especially especially for investigative reportings, like I think it's a time that we really need to prioritize well-being of journalists so that they could be, on the field like stress less and also like do important stories. Because like I've seen like some of the journalists that they have gone through difficult psychological situations in Nepal. I know like two of the journalists I know like they did suicide as well in the past few years because of the conditions and turmoils they have to go through. So I think another important thing would be to prioritize the safety and well-being, of journalists. I think I will discuss more during the questions that Andrea will have, and I would like to pass it to Selassie.
Thank you. Can we move to the next slide, please? All right, so my name is Selassie, and I am from Ghana. I work as an investigative producer, so I produce a bunch of documentaries. Today, I would like to talk a bit about Ghana. I mean, Ghana is where I come from. And for a very long time, since 1992, the country has, to a large extent, had enjoyed so much press freedom. It's been very incredible. But over the last couple of years, we've seen a bit of an erosion of this. And as a result of that, Ghana, the promise that we have as journalists is sort of depleting in terms of what the reality on the ground is. And so things are getting like gradually bad. And can we move to the next slide, please? Yeah, I mean, there are like stories of accounts since the beginning of this year. I mean, up until May, we've had a total of 14 cases of attacks on journalists, and usually it's been from physical violence to arresting people without following the due process, and it's been quite disturbing. As a result of that, our ranking in the International Press Freedom Index has dropped significantly, and even though Ghana is considered as a beacon of democracy, that is obviously very disturbing. Next slide. So personally, over the last 12 years, I've been working on, not yet. Over the last 12 years, I've been working on documentaries, and most of them have been investigative documentaries, and they've had significant impact. Usually when these stories come out, we've had governments act, and then we've had incredible things happen. But in 2018, I directed this documentary about corruption in football, and sadly, part of it exposed corruption in politics as well. And so I just want to show like a bit of the documentary.
Anas Aremeyaw Anas, one of the most high-profile and controversial African journalists. An undercover specialist, he never shows his face. For 2 years, he's been unlocking the secrets of African football.
The tension is so high, it's football, and it's Ghana, and the people have cried for far too long.
Almost 100 match officials captured on camera, taking money when they shouldn't. One of them, a referee, meant to be running the line at the World Cup in Russia. Another, a FIFA executive, who's one of the most powerful figures in African football. With the World Cup just days away, this is the inside story of Anas's most explosive and controversial investigation to date.
So yeah, so this story came out like 4 years ago, and unlike most stories we had done in the past, because part of it exposed corruption in high places, it came with a lot of threats to the organization, threats to most of the journalists who were working on the story. And we actually took measures. Some people were taken out of the country. We took measures to keep ourselves safe. But 6 months after doing the story, this other thing happened.
Undercover journalist has been shot dead. Ahmed Hussein Swaleh was a member of Tiger Eye Private Investigations. He was driving home in the capital, Accra, when reports say men on motorbikes shot him 3 times. He was instrumental in a wide-reaching expose into corruption into Ghanaian football, about which the BBC's Africa Eye programme made a documentary. But after that documentary, this man, a politician called Kennedy Agyapong, circulated photos of Mr. Hussein Swaleh and called for him to be beaten. In fact, last summer, the New York-based Committee to Protect Journalists called on Mr. Agyapong to stop threatening journalists. Well, Mr. Agyapong said he's not connected in any way to the killing.
Yeah, so this gentleman, who happens to be a member of parliament and an influential member of the government as well, he owns his own TV station, which is obviously for government propaganda and stuff. And our reporter, who in times past no one knew his face because he was an investigative journalist, he managed to get a photo of the guy and he showed it on his television station, imploring people to go beat him up. And 6 months later, this happened. And nothing has happened to show who the killers have been. This guy has gone ahead to just, with impunity, just put people on his TV station, just saying all sorts of things against them. And unfortunately, we've not had anyone within the government to call him to book. And so as a result of this level of impunity, we've had a lot of journalists who keep being attacked. And so that's the reason why over the last couple of months, even before like the first half of this year, we've had all these people being attacked, and it's gradually eroding confidence because there's been no accountability for the people who seemingly try to intimidate some of these journalists. So as a result of this, and for the sake of our lives, through a project that we've been working on in Nigeria that has been sponsored by the MacArthur Foundation, we have had the opportunity to stress collaboration as the best way to be able to overcome some of these things. I mean, why collaboration? Because when journalists collaborate, we see it as a way of diffusing the risk. We see it as giving people the opportunity so they don't become targets. As a result of that, we get some of our reporters from other countries to come help us do some of the stories. So once they are out, they don't get exposed. I'll be more than happy to take more questions and answer more things related to this, but I'll move it on to Andrea.
Hi. Oh, yeah. Thank you so much, Selassie, Enrique, and Rajneesh for the presentations. So I have a couple of questions here I'm going to ask, but I would also like to ask the audience if you have any question, you might raise your hand, and then we can bring you the microphone. So my first question for the three of you would be, what specific tactics or specific tools have helped you in your coverage of corruption? I know you already mentioned a couple in your presentations, but I would like to ask you to mention more, or maybe to go deeper in what you said. And also, impact is very important for us journalists. So if you could mention the impact of some of the stories that you mentioned, or other stories that you've covered in the past, that would be great. So let's start with Rajneesh.
Thank you. Especially on the tools and techniques, like what we are doing through, at first, our pitching process was very irregular. Like, we used to do the pitching process like how normal outlets, because I've worked with the major outlets like the New York Times, Al Jazeera, and others. It was basically like a simple pitching process that we used to follow. But now we have a little bit changed the pitching process. Even during the pitching process, we want evidence and some sort of documentations being submitted to us, or when we start investigations, we want to do that. So some of the stories we are working, even to get the pitches approved, it takes 3-4 months, just to go deeper in the investigations as well. And during the 2.5 years, we got a membership with GIJN, and also with a new partner with OCRP. We're also collaborating on cross-border stories with them, and also working with journalists, not only from Nepal but also from other countries and other regions. It has been been really helpful, and collaborating and getting the resources as well. It has helped a lot, because like the stories right now don't have just like national angle only, like they have international linkage, international connection, and international approaches. So we are trying to follow that, and going back to the basics of investigative journalism, like everything like the document trail, the people trail, using like online tools and others. That's what we are generally following. But something like on the evidence side of it, like we have become very strict, like since we started on that. Yeah. Yes, regarding the impact, it's really important question on impact. For example, the one I did about the red passport scam story, like the immediate impact was the investigations started. These lawmakers lost their job, and also on the politician involved in trafficking women from Nepal to India, this time during the local election, like he could not contest the election. That was immediate impact, but at the same time, there are different levels of corruptions and other loopholes that they use it. Yeah.
Thanks, Raj. Talking about some of the tactics to stay safe, and I would love to take it a little bit broader. I am an international journalist. I was a foreigner in Myanmar. So I wanted to touch upon that aspect. And as Selassie already mentioned, the importance of collaboration. And I really think there is a role for local journalists and international journalists to work together. In some instances, you can get access easier or not. You can put your name on a story or better not. So Global Ground Media, we have journalists across Southeast Asia. Some of them are free to put their name on the story. Others decide not to do so for safety reasons. We do a lot of skill sharing in a sense as well. But I think all of this has to be done in an ethical manner. And there's definitely some lessons to be learned also for Myanmar. One example is after the coup, CNN came to Myanmar on a military-sponsored trip. They always had officers with them. They were only shown around the country and interviewing generals. And then they did push and wanted to interview some locals. The military allowed that, but they arrested everybody who talked to the media. So in that sense, there are journalists in the country, local and international ones, and I think it's not the importance of getting a breaking news story, of getting an interview, getting something out there. You really have to think about the people you put at risk, both the media, but also the sources in this instance. And in terms of impact, I think right now with Myanmar, the situation is so difficult. There are sanctions on the government, or the military junta. The economy has collapsed by 18%. The value of the currency has depreciated by 60%. All of that had not had the impact that they stop the coup and regain power. So I don't think we shouldn't expect that I write a story about corruption and they are like, oh, now that Enrique said something, I'm gonna give something back. At the same time, there is definitely a role for the kind of corruption stories, because most mainstream media only cover the coup, the protests, how many people died, what's going on in that regard. There's very few journalists still covering corruption. And there's definitely an impact of telling them, we are watching. We are watching what you're doing. The story about COVID-19 funding was picked up widely. The UN retweeted it. Everybody was talking about it. The Multilateral Development Bank was asked questions of how to prevent that and what the consequences of that are. So we need to keep these stories in the news for the long term. We are not journalists and want to have an impact tomorrow, we are doing this for the generations to come. And I do believe in the power of civil society and of media if we do it in a safe way and don't take risks that are unnecessary.
Thank you. So for me, when it comes to tactics, I basically see it in three broad ways. First of all, like before the story breaks or during reporting, right? I think like Raj said, it's important to be super diligent. Make sure you have a rock solid story so that because you know that once the story comes out, it's going to be, people are going to context it in so many ways. They're going to come against it. And then the second thing is like when the story breaks. And that's where collaboration comes in. Over the last couple of years, most of the stories we've done, we try as much as possible to work with media organizations beyond our own. The story on football, for instance, the BBC did a story on it. And usually you see in developing countries, especially like Ghana, I can speak to that. Usually when you're doing a story and there's an international partner, they know they cannot touch the international partner. And so your excuse to them is like, the story is already out there. And they know that no matter what they do to you, it's going to come out anyway. And so it's really helped us in the past. And then lastly, once the story breaks, you have to be super careful, right? You have to stay safe. You have to observe like the basic digital security hygiene. You have to make sure that, you know, your phone could be tapped, you could be followed. You have to make sure your family is safe. The reporter that got killed, he was taken out of the country for a while. But obviously they were watching him, and so it was 6 months later. So usually when you do some of these stories, you just have to be super careful, and you don't always live like any other person. And in terms of impact, impact has been quite solid. One of the things we do at Tactics, especially in Ghana, the outfit that I often produce documentaries for, they try as much as possible to carry the public along. Because once the story comes out, if the public know that certain people have been exposed, I mean, they actually cry out, and then the government knows that they have to act anyway. So a couple of weeks ago, I got called to direct another documentary, which exposed the deputy finance minister. He was caught in a sting operation taking bribes. And even before the video was premiered, the president fired the deputy finance minister. And so we always look out for that kind of impact, but you don't get it in a vacuum. You get it after your work is like rock solid. People realize that what you do cannot be refuted because obviously they're going to take you to court. We've had like numerous suits in court, but the lead reporter that at the outfit analysis always appeared in court, he's been able to provide the video evidence and he's never lost a case. So for me, I think those are the things to think about.
Thank you so much. I don't know if anyone in the audience would like to ask something. If not, I have more questions, so I'm going to keep going. So, oh, where? Okay. So while I go there, I want to ask you, maybe you want to answer, what is it like to work more with local journalists? So can you talk about your experiences being maybe fixers or just working with them, and how could the situation improve? Let's start now with Selassie, then Enrique, and then Rashid.
Try it again.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm a local journalist myself, right? And I guess the key thing is to always have the support of the organizations you work with and for. As a freelance producer, I've done stuff for the BBC, the New York Times, and a couple of other international media organizations, and they've been super supportive, right? Also, contacts like this do help. You know, at conferences like this, you have a relationship with a network of journalists, like we do with Transparency International. So when something happens, you could easily call on. I know there have been unfortunate situations where some media organizations would rather consider you just as their fixer. And so being a fixer means like you don't have the umbrella protection of the news organization. And that is quite unfortunate. In certain circles, I think that's changing because different conversations have been had. But just relying on your network and making sure that you're supported as a local journalist, so when something happens to you, you can have international media call in. Because always when something happens like in a bad way, like it's just dark in your country. You need the signal of people outside of your country to be able to make the calls on your behalf.
Thanks. I would love to touch upon two aspects. Of course, I work with local journalists, and I own the media company, so I take responsibility for working with them. And I think nowadays it's really easy to kind of be this Wild West freelance reporter, and you get very little support. Both me as a freelancer when I work for other media or for the Netherlands broadcast media, but also if I work with others. I think we all in that supply chain have a responsibility and need to take a responsibility and demand also, if you are working with others, that they do think about safety. And I always have check-in times with people, like let me know where you are. We even use a safety app that tracks their location. I include freelancers in my media liability insurance, for example, which is a very costly expense for others, make sure they are paid fairly. I think all these things are essential. And we don't want to turn journalism, especially freelance journalism, into this gig economy, right? Just like Uber and Amazon, you don't get any support and pay, and I think we can do that better. And that also means for me that there were times when I was working for international media, they would ask me, can you please go outside today to this protest? Can you bring a big camera? And I was like, there are snipers, they are targeting people. Yeah, but it looks better and the quality is better. Yeah, that's a risk today I'm not comfortable taking anymore. Or somebody else asked me, can you please report from your balcony? But that would identify my home. So no, I will not shoot from my balcony. And these things, I don't know if people don't realize it or journalists don't want to say no and offend them, but I think we really have to change the culture of what it means to be a freelance reporter for many.
Thank you. I go with what Selassie also mentioned about like being a local journalist, but I'm not very comfortable with the word fixture. Like there was this article at the Columbia Journalism Review, like I think a couple of years back, about the use of word fixture. Like, why don't we call them a reporter? Like, because like it's them on the ground, they're reporting, they're investigating, they are getting the data, they're translating. Like why should we use a fixture? Like, because if we look at dictionary definition of fixture, it's somebody who arranges something and that has some elect or other dubious regions. So I would prefer to use the word journalist or a reporter itself, maybe a local reporter or maybe just a reporter. Like, I think because they have so much of experience in the field, reporting, investigating, and getting it get done. Like, and the big outlets do understand this, especially like the big outlets. But I think there is still some sort of things that needs to be done so that especially the local journalists and reporters out there are equally credited, equally paid, and also like their issues are equally recognized as well. Yeah.
So my name is Christian. I work as a financial investigator at the FIU of the Netherlands. So I'm specifically interested in follow the money techniques, and I was wondering if any of you can tell something about if you make use of follow the money techniques in your investigations, and if you look further than the corruption and the bribery, how are the proceeds being laundered? And if you look to that, and do you see any specific red flags? So.
So this is really difficult in a country like Nepal, like following the monies. Like, we are doing some investigations on money laundering at the moment, and that has some international links. And the banks normally don't share the records, and even like the officials are not interested. And also like international banks, I know they will say, they will just flag out like, there's a red flag on this, but like when we reach out to them, it has been very difficult. But despite of that, like we're trying, and we are looking for evidence. We're looking for like different details and all these things. And this has been like very time consuming. At the same time, it has been really difficult to investigate on, especially money laundering from the developing nations to the developed nations, or when the money is coming from the developed nations to and also like each cases will have a different strategy or different way of getting. But yeah, so it's a very hard question. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Lovely to see somebody from the Netherlands. I remember the days when I used to work for the Dutch government and we could just ask for bank records. I still dream about those days. Nonetheless, it is possible to do some illicit financial flows analysis. Depends really on the product that you're tracking and some of the red flags that we would look at. We work with great sources and whistleblowers. We actually managed to get the bank transferred from a military-owned bank. They were leaked, for example. The corporate registry was completely scraped and all the documents shared. Unfortunately, now in September, they closed it. It's not online available anymore. But there's definitely techniques and things that we do try to use. I think for Myanmar, and again, depending on the product, if it's drugs, it's mainly, for example, cash mule transfers. It can also be casino-linked or trade-based money laundering. So there's different things we look at. But especially now in this situation, people are really keen on sharing information. So maybe they continue working, but they definitely want to share information with media and civil society. So we thank them. We thank everything to them. Thanks.
Well, so I have like no direct experience with that. The closest I've come to it was like working on the football story, where as part of the sting operation, the president of the Ghana Football Association was flown into the Middle East. So he was having a conversation with the investigators. And for me, I thought like reviewing and editing that footage, I thought it was such a masterclass in how people move assets in the developing world, because he spoke about ways that they could hide and move some of the money that was going to be paid to him. He mentioned stuff like registering a company, changing the name of the ownership of the company, and so like that's the kind of experience I do have. It's not direct; it's based on what I've seen in works that I have produced or edited in the past.
Thank you. So, I see 2 more questions. So.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Denise Ledgard, and I lead the governance team at UNDP Peru. So coming from a developing country and seeing, for example, the case of Myanmar, I thought, okay, we had the same, and in a democracy. So that's something that commonly happens in countries like many countries in South America and Southeast Asia, etc. But when we go into big cases like the football world, and now with the World Cup, for example, there's a documentary at Netflix that is called like Revealed, FIFA Revealed or something like that. So when you watch that documentary and you see the big corruption that it happens everywhere, in every stage, you wonder, okay, so what's going to happen? So on the other hand, for example, there's a podcast in Colombia. It's a very well-known podcast, and they did an investigation about also the corruption for the World Cup. And then the results were that after all the trials and investigation that happened, surprisingly or not, just the South American leaders in the FIFA were actually trialed and sanctioned and put in prison, but not the people coming from developed countries. So I really would like to know what is the experiences that you have doing an investigation of cases in developed countries? Thank you.
Very good question. So I'm going to take another one, and then maybe you guys can answer.
Hi, thank you, everybody. My name is Shoakin Folarin from Civic Media Lab in Nigeria. I want to present some challenge I have. So I run an organization where we do investigations with news organizations in the grassroots. In order to reveal some systemic flaws in the government, we realized that we might have to insert ourselves into the system and document the process in order to expose it. Running this means that I am responsible for these journalists, and sometimes I have to shut down investigations because it's not safe. But I also have to balance the greater good. So for instance, we have a situation in which the judicial process in Nigeria is flawed such that you could take somebody from the most wanted terrorist list and build a new identity for the person. You get them banking information and all that. How do I expose that to the public so that we change that system without getting the reporter that goes in on the cover? Because when they find out, they will now go against, they will go after the reporter and get him imprisoned. So these are some of the ethical and some of the challenging situations that I'm dealing with, and I'll need your insight on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions. So if you guys want to start.
Thank you for the question from Peru. I think it's very important indeed that we talk about the role of developed countries and enablers and facilitators in those countries. I think both the perpetrators of corruption, for example, the ones paying bribes or receiving bribes, but also all the lawyers and the accountants who are facilitating this. We haven't talked about this, I feel like, until this year. We're now really starting to have this discussion. In the US, they're trying to push the Enablers Act through Congress and make that actually illegal and focus on that. In the EU a few weeks ago, we actually made it a crime to support sanction evasion, sanction circumvention. So I think there was a lack of acknowledging the problem and a legal gap perhaps being possible to follow through with that. But I'm sure also a lack of political will, because we all know of massive cases. In Germany, there was a massive case a few years ago where billions of dollars in bribes were paid and no one was really going after that. I think we need to keep reporting these stories and keep pushing for it, because I agree, it's not just the developed countries, it's also, or not just the developing countries, it's also the developed countries who are a part of that. But I feel like we've only started to look at that this year. We need more stories, we need to push on this a lot more. I think recently I saw statistics, don't quote me on this, but I think it was like 60% of all illicit financial flows go through 36 advanced economies. 60% of all countries in the planet. It's amazing how big the role is of developed countries in this. So I agree that we need to be a lot better with this.
Yeah, so mine more to the question of the story that you're having a dilemma with. I think the key consideration, I mean, for the teams I've worked in the past is like, you always think about the public interest, right? And so when you're doing stories that require you to have a sting operation or go undercover, you have to think if you have exhausted all other means before. So undercover or going in there, embedding yourself, it's more as a last resort. But also, how do you deal with the whole idea of making sure that your reporter is not exposed in a way that people come after them. You'll be amazed because in Ghana, this is what I know. Even people within government, if you work hard enough, you're going to find allies. You're going to find people who know there's this problem and would want to help you in exposing it. And so my suggestion would be that you would just have to work with others beyond your own newsroom. It could be civil society organizations. Like I said, the project by MacArthur Foundation in Nigeria, it really emphasizes a lot of that collaboration, where in the past even right before breaking a story, I have gone to have meetings with key people within the network to ask them, like, who do you know we could work with before the story comes out? Because you're thinking about things like arrest. You're thinking about things like the judicial service. How can they protect you? And I know the fear sometimes is with, like, you don't want them to know your story before it comes out, but you can always test the waters, or you can always talk to people that you trust who could make recommendations. Because when you think about developing countries, our systems are not that strong. But if you look really hard enough, you would find people who do care about strengthening some of those institutions. And always, like, you can always get them as allies in breaking such stories.
So I want to just, share something like what's happening in Nepal as the World Cup is going on. Like we have so many migrant workers from Nepal going to Qatar and other Middle East countries, for work. So there's this picture that went on Twitter, like a very viral picture, which showed that, editors of major media outlets holding football with the Qatari ambassador in Nepal. And there were like editors of almost all, media outlets out there. And the death numbers are still not decreasing. And I was there last month, like doing investigations on like how many new deaths were there as the World Cup is going on, and people, especially like migrant workers working on construction sites, the death numbers are still, still there. It's still going on, and the story with like I was part with was published in the BBC. So, especially like in developing countries, the developed economies will try to like just try to bring these editors like for parties or something like that, and try to have a good space where, and I haven't seen like really good reporting about the migrant workers in the Nepali press. So. This is also another tactics that's happening out there, where the story is like the Times Magazine will cover it as a front page, the New York Times or the BBC, highlighting stories about the migrant workers. But especially in the Nepali, what about in the Nepali press? Like we saw that pictures of editors enjoying a quite good dinner with football, out there. So I think that's also another aspect to look into, and also how to make the local press and independent press more vibrant. That it's not just who we are reporting about, but also like the entire press in our countries are reporting about. So I think that's another thing. And another challenge is in developing countries like Nepal is there's a lot of corporate interest where the media owners will have like multiple businesses, multiple interests, and they will not report something that will harm their business. Another challenge is also about like politicians getting involved in media business, and in Nepal especially, like we have seen like really good journalists becoming political advisors of governments, and that really hampers journalism in future as well, and also the investigations, and also good journalism. I think that's a very backset for good journalism in our country. Yeah.
Thank you to the three of you. I think we should have maybe a last round of questions. So I have one there. Who else has questions? You have a question, and there was so these three questions will be the last ones. So I'm gonna start with you here.
Thank you. My name is Deji Olaore. I'm with USAID, Washington, D.C. My question goes to Salasi. I think a couple of years ago, a story broke out about the judges taking bribe in Ghana. I don't know whether you are involved in that or not, but my question is about the impact that she mentioned. aside from suspending the 12 judges because it was a massive case, were there other impacts that this case had on the institutions? Because we are talking about an institutional that is very important to accountability and transparency. Thank you.
So you can go ahead and start while I move the
All right,
microphone.
cool. Thank you. Yes, I directed that documentary about the judges, and you're right. The first wave of impact was the firing of the judges. What we were hoping for was that there would be some level of prosecution. That didn't happen, and so obviously we had to like sort of count losses, right? I guess. But I guess one of the things that has done to the judiciary is just this level of alertness, that when people are dealing with you, they are wondering, okay, could you be a reporter who might expose me? And so that level of awareness, we count it as some form of impact to a large extent. Of course, it could have been that these people get fired, prosecuted, so other people don't. Also, another effect of this is that they would find much more sophisticated ways of being corrupt, which, of course, we have done our part, and perhaps we could get into it. But sometimes you have this whole thing of, okay, I mean, judges have never been fired before, so that's enough. We shouldn't jail them. And so it's more an issue of how the system operates. What I know is that the lead reporter for some of these stories, he presents the evidence to the necessary authorities. Usually he even petitions the presidency or whichever institution is in charge and asks for specific things to be done. But there's often a lot of delays. I haven't followed up on this. This was in 2015. But I'm sure if I follow up, and I wouldn't be surprised by it, I would find that perhaps the case is still in court, or some people have not shown up in court. And that's what happens with some of these stories, because there's just that fear that we don't want very prominent people to be put in prison. But the first wave happened, and we count that as perhaps our best impact.
Thank you, panelists. I'm Kelly O'Donnell, Geneva area psychologist. A comment, but where I'm heading are two Ps, if any of you would like to respond to these two Ps. One has to do with putting your psychological life on the line. The title is Putting Your Life on the Line. Maybe a little more about that. Do you ever feel that? Like you're going crazy or emotional breakdown or just anxious PTSD symptoms? Putting your life on the line. And then the second P is protective factors. What things do you do? Do you notice another journalist that protect them in order to maintain their emotional well-being, their resiliency? And I kind of know the research in this. I work in this area with humanitarians, but it really applies with you. One quick comment, and then I'll just hand the question over. I don't know if anyone was at one of the workshops where Senator Sheldon Whitehouse spoke 2 days ago. He's actively involved in the United States Congress, putting together legislation, publicly advocating anti-corruption, et cetera. But he ended his comments with this little anecdote, this little expression. He said, you know, what we need to do is shine the light. When we shine the light in the kitchen, the cockroaches run. They flee. And I think that's what's happening with journalists, investigative reporters. So I liked that. Then I went back to my friend's house where I'm staying. I'm almost done. And I said, you know, I don't know if I really like that. Because when you shine the light, sure, in the kitchen, the cockroaches run, but the rats and the vipers start attacking you, you know? And so I'm just wondering, what is it like for you, psychological life on the line in view of you're just not dealing with cockroaches?
Yeah.
Very good question.
You can start answering.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes.
No, I think all of us have our own personal stories. I don't think I ever talked about this, but happy to break the silence after a year. And again, I do want to preface with saying that local journalists have it 1,000 times worse than I would ever have. And I feel weird about talking about it. Journalists don't like to become the story, right? But it's also good to talk about the impact on this. So yeah, after the coup, there was a bomb went off in my street. There were several nights where the prisoners who were released were putting arson and trying to get into your place, and you're there by yourself. You don't have any internet, all communication is cut, things are just going on around you. And then also slowly people started to come up to me, asking me questions, who I was, what I was doing, what I thought of the coup. So yeah, you start to notice that you're being followed, and you know that you're on the radar, just like any other foreigner, honestly, and any other media worker. So it was interesting. I think initially we do this job because we want to have an impact, and of course it was also exciting. You get tons of adrenaline the first couple of weeks. After a couple of weeks, I started to notice that I wasn't thinking that clearly anymore. I think the adrenaline kind of died down. You're not sleeping well, you get exhausted, everything is difficult. And then I remember I had a conversation, and that was really good, talking about best practices and what is something that I recommend. When things were getting worse and worse after the coup, initially you think it's going to be a few weeks, going to be a few days, then it's going to be over. When it just gets longer, I had a conversation and said, okay, what is the moment when I can do more good outside of the country? And what is the moment when I'm putting myself at so much risk that I think I stayed too long because you don't want to leave and you feel a sense of responsibility. But I had this list with like 3 things. If this is happened, then I should leave. And then a few months later, that same person was like, how about do you remember the list? Like you're going over it. And we're having this conversation, and I was like, okay, I think it's time that I leave. So that's when I left. Other best practices, you mentioned humanitarians. And I was just struck by how different the situation is. But please correct me if I'm wrong. But often, like the big UN agencies, if you work at a refugee camp, you have mandatory R&R, you have to disconnect, there's regular check-ins, there's debriefs when you get out. We don't have any of this. Why not? And I've joined a couple of programs about journalism, mental health, and taking care of yourself. I find there's a very prominent focus on just do some mindfulness, do some yoga, do some breathing exercise, try to eat healthy. And it's like, it's not, you have like normal stress of the normal 21st century. This is not something you can just breathe through and then it's gone. So I think we need to do a lot more. And taking mandatory breaks, disconnecting. Somebody said the other day to me that they assign themselves a positive or a solution story once in a while, just to not focus only on the negative. And I think these things are really important, and we can learn a lot from how UN agencies take care of their staff. We should just copy what they do to some extent, I think. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, so for me personally, for a long time, I was just, I don't know, just melded with every story I did. There was nothing distinguishing me from the story. I owned all the story, and I never realized the toll it was taking on me up until, say, 2020, when all of us were like just indoors. Nothing was happening, no action. It was all silence. And for once, I had to just deal with it. For instance, when my colleague got killed, I was the person who was designated to go identify his body at the morgue. And I did. I didn't blink. I just went through it. But it was just in 2020 that I had to like unpack a lot of this and then just sit quietly with it. And I had to like seek some professional help. Over the last year, I spent time with the Nieman Foundation at Harvard. And part of the things we did was to like just write about our experiences. And it's really helped me. I've seen that there's been some significant improvement in how I approach stories now. I approach stories more, I view them as a tool that I'm using. And so I don't put myself too much into it. And I've also tried to create some breathing space between my work and having things outside of work that I could do. And so I'm not all about the story now. I do care about it, but I mean, like, based on the question he asked earlier, it's like, it's not just the story you tell, but there's no impact sometimes, and you wonder, like, is it worth it? And if you inhabit that for a long time, you get to the point where it's complete depletion. And so I've learned that, okay, after a story, I need to take a step back and get into my life, which is more than just like the profession. And it's really helped me. I mean, I speak to colleagues about it. I've had colleagues who've had mental breakdowns, and sometimes I tell them, can you just take a break? It's not easy when you're telling a journalist to take a break, because we love the story, like, we love to keep going. But I've learned to just bring in certain things in my life. I mean, no matter how bad it gets, like, every morning I try to go for my workout, you know, those things just do help my mind. And it's really proven to be a game changer for me.
I think really important question, and many times, like, especially we don't look at this issue. And after reporting Nepal earthquake, where I saw so many deaths, and also the COVID-19, like, stresses and everything, you know, myself, like, it's really difficult to comprehend all the situations. And so what I do normally is take around like a 10 days break every year, and go for, you know, meditations like Vipassana, where I just, you know, forget everything and just, you know, sit there and meditate without talking with anyone, just complete silence. And we do the trainings for journalists as well. What we do is use these techniques where we ask them to meditate for like maybe an hour or 2 hours, like, you know, so that it's more calm, relaxing, a little bit relaxing on this. And for journalists, like, we provide like free psychological counseling. So if there is anything, like anyone in our network needs anything, there's a free psychological counseling that started during the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's still continuing. And we are also thinking about, I think the well-being is really important, and how to make the life of journalists more relaxful and more, you know, joyful. I think it's really important as well. Yeah.
Thank you. So we have our last question.
Thank you very much. My name is Daniel. I'm coming from Armenia. And I'm not sure, to some extent my question is out of context, but we have quite interesting problem in Armenia. We have seen a year and a half ago, several cases of violence against journalists. It was not, I mean, journalists were not kind of heavily beaten. It was not danger to their life, but still it was a violence. And we as an organization, as a human rights organization, we try to protect those journalists, to go to the law enforcement and things like that. But we were quite heavily criticized by the society for protecting journalists. That's an interesting story, because in Armenia there is a very big problem of media manipulations, of false news, false media outlets even. I mean, because of very low level of media literacy and lack of democratic traditions or understanding of society of democratic traditions, or understanding of society how important media is, media hates journalists. White society hates journalists. And they criticize us when we are protecting journalists, when we're trying to go against people who committed crimes against journalists. And actually my question is the Armenia only country where we face such a problem? And what should we do? By we, I don't mean only we in Armenia. I mean generally, what should we do with this problem?
Wow, excellent question. So, who wants to start?
I mean, I'll say,
Selassie?
yeah, just keep going. I mean, I'm sorry, but keep going just sounds like the thing. And also, like, if this brings any comfort, it's everywhere. Usually in developing countries, right? You made a key point about, you know, the low level of media literacy. you have people who don't yet understand that, someone compares like the work we do as journalists to like the air, right? You take it for granted because it's there. But the absence of it means that, people are going to be acting with impunity, people are going to be eating people, and, society is going to spiral out of control. And that is what you need to keep reminding people about, Politicians do know. They know how powerful media is. It's the reason why it's easy for you to see a politician wanting to own a media organization. Or once they ascend to power, the media is like the first line of place that they attack. And if you look back, I said this, which I know is a hot take, but media has always been used as a tool for power. And so you think about even the major media organizations and how they take certain stances in times of war, you see that, yes, so once you know and appreciate and understand the power you wield by supporting media, I think you should just like keep your stake in the ground and keep going. Ultimately, things will get better, or it might end up inspiring someone else to take it up. But you shouldn't forget that the absence of media would be worse than the discomfort you get when you are working on some of these stories.
Let me talk about the developed countries. And I do think, maybe the problem is larger in developing, but I think media is also hated to some extent in the country that we are sitting in right now. When you talk about how media is treated. And I think the best protection against that is conducting ethical journalism. You should report the truth always. And there are media organizations who are biased and who are financed by a political party, or who are coming out and supporting a candidate. That's something really weird. In the Netherlands, I don't think media would say, there's an election going on, I think this political party is the best one. So there's things to stay unbiased and to just become an ethical journalist, publish who you receive your money from, be very transparent, have a code of conduct on your website. If you have an opinion article or a column, identify it as such, as opposed to being unbiased media. And then I think there's an aspect where there is a narrative about fake news and disinformation, which is actually not and is misused and targeted to quality media. And we have to counter that as media. And I think the best way to do that is to be transparent and to make it very clear, this is what we mean with quality journalism, and this is what is not quality journalism. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Like in Armenia, in Nepal as well, like there are a certain section of people like who, they don't love media as such because, and I think it's also because we as journalists need to engage with the audience in much better way to understand what type of stories they are looking for, engaging in a better sense. So I think that engagement needs to be better because with the social media and other things like digital media happening. So there has been a lot of questions as well. Like if somebody in Nepal says where do you read that news? They also they read that news on Facebook. Facebook does not produce any content. It's definitely through other content, right? And there is a lot of YouTube and other social media stuff, and it's also TikTok and others are producing a lot, and that is not journalism. And at the same time, look at what Selassie said about media literacy. We need to make sure what journalism is and what investigative journalism is, and what importance it will reflect to the society. Yeah.
So I'm the moderator, but I will add my opinion because I work in Latin America and I'm actually from Mexico. So Mexico is one of the deadliest countries right now for journalists. And often what we see are attacks and comments, violent comments for journalists, but from fake accounts or trolling online. So whenever you go and read news and there are so many online comments against the article or the author. So I'd like to invite you to think, who hates media, right? Like, are you basing your comments on what you read online, or are you basing your comments on what you hear, right? So maybe identifying what are the groups that actually say they hate media. And I would share a challenge we have in Mexico, which is now indifference. Sadly, we've had various deaths of colleagues in the country, and I feel like now we're so overwhelmed by the indifference of our government and also of society. Like, we are not raising up, right? Like, we'd like to see our population asking what is happening to our journalists, but still, like, various colleagues are still exposing corruption from high levels of politicians. Actually, the most, I would say, recognized journalists in Mexico are women journalists who are not scared, and they're still investigating. And it's, you know, my colleagues also mentioned it, it's all about thinking of the bigger picture, and they often know they can be killed, but they, of course, they have measures and they don't want to be killed, but when you talk to them, it's always like exposing corruption for the greater good. So, well, with that, I would like to end this panel. Thank you, Rajneesh, Anne, and Selassie for being here. Here. And I would also like to thank the audience and also invite you to reach with our colleagues who, you know, we're going to be here, we're going to be at the conference for the rest of the days, so please feel free to come and say hi. Thank you.